Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Peace's guest speaker series as we've been focused on talking to lawyer and paralegal bencher candidates. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone, and they don't reflect me, Justice and Peace's Trias College, or any other education institution or organization that I'm affiliated with. Continuing on with the series, we have Stephen joining us here today. First of all, thanks a lot for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me.
And perhaps let's get started with, tell us a little bit more about yourself for any listeners that don't know who you are.
Sure, great. Well, thanks again for the for having me on your series, and I've quite enjoyed watching the various individuals who are putting forward their name, both for on the lawyer side and the paralegal side. So, a bit about myself. So, I've spent most of my career in either the broader public sector or as an in-house counsel. So I did spend a short period of my time in private practice, but most of the time has been spent in government, a government agency such as the Ontario Securities Commission, or for a non-for-profit regulatory body. In this case, it was FP Canada, Financial Planning Canada. So I kind of come to this kind of from that side of the profession, which is, has traditionally actually been underrepresented at convocation. There have been government lawyers in convocation before, and there have been in-house lawyers in convocation, but for the most part, they've been a minority of the individuals. So I bring that background.
Now, speaking of obviously the bencher election there, you've put your name forth. Perhaps can tell us why you're running for bencher this time around.
Sure. So, I've always been engaged with the practice of law as far as the governing of it. And I've spent a great deal of my time volunteering, mostly on the association side. Some of you may know that last year I was the president of the Canadian Bar Association, which hopefully most of you are members of. There's about 37,000 members nationally. Obviously, a big, substantial amount of that comes from the province of Ontario, but I've always been involved and interested in justice issues. And I also spent time prior to that as a president of the Canadian Corporate Counsel Association. So I've been interested, but as far as the Law Society, I've been focusing more of my time on the association side than the regulatory side. But like other members of the coalition, I've been quite concerned about what I've seen over the last 4 years at the Law Society. Obviously, the ability to regulate ourselves, self-regulation is a right, not a privilege. Is a privilege, not a right. Sorry. And the fact is that I kind of worry about what's going on, and kind of what the consequences of us not being able to effectively govern ourselves will be on that privilege of self-regulation. And I've been watching some of the issues that have come forward, and I just feel like there is the time for different voices, different perspectives, with highlighting the importance of good governance, which is obviously the name of the Good Governance Coalition that I'm running with. But the idea that we may not all agree on everything, but we are going to govern the organization as fiduciaries of the organization. We're going to govern the organization to protect the public interest. And I just thought this was an appropriate time. There needs to be a change of what's going on in the Law Society, and I decided to put my name forward as part of the Good Governance Coalition.
Now, I mean, it's interesting, and certainly, if you've watched some of the other ones, I kind of talk about this sort of phenomenon where you're coming forth with a Good Governance Coalition, but at the same time, the last election there was the Stop Stop group, and now some of the members and some new ones are running as Full Stop, and essentially you have your group essentially pointing to, wait a second, there's a problem here with slates, and we saw what happened the last time, and there was vote splitting, and is this party politics needed in our board of directors, so to speak? But at the same time, we're running as a group, as a coalition, and if we're elected, we'll look at sort of dissolving this idea or electoral reform, and it kind of creates this, well, if you're criticizing that, then why are you doing it? And then if there's no issue with that, then why are you looking at going away with it? And How would you kind of look at that? And when you chose to join and run as part of the coalition, I mean, you could have certainly gone independently or
Yeah.
without an affiliation, but how do you kind of reconcile that? Because it certainly creates a sort of, how do you navigate this situation given you're doing just as the same thing as what you're
Yeah.
criticizing?
Look, I get the perspective, and I understand that there is a certain degree of, okay, you're doing what you said you didn't think made sense. But I got a couple of reasons, a couple of things. Number one, this is not a political party. The coalition is not a political party. It's a slate of like-minded individuals who all have different perspectives on issues. We were discussing before we went live that there really is a diversity within the coalition. Everybody brings different backgrounds, different perspectives. And with the exception of some core principles that we've all agreed to, we all have, different perspectives of what priorities need to be. For example, one thing I'd be happy to talk to you about is one thing I really strongly believe in, which is mental health and wellness, and kind of focusing on that. The Law Society needs to really focus on that. But as it relates to the coalition, I mean, it's kind of a means to an end. And the end is that we really do need to have more effective governance at the Law Society. And if we weren't going to run in a coalition, we saw what happened 4 years ago. That doesn't preclude the other group that's kind of mobilized into a faction doing the same thing that they did 4 years ago, which they were highly successful on. And what we saw there effectively is a minority of voters elected this coalition because of the vote splitting. So something needed to be done. This coalition, as I said, is a means to an end. But none of us on the coalition are, view this as a permanent solution to how these type of elections should be run. But it is what needs to be done for this election in order to obviously bring a change to the Law Society.
Now you touched on mental health there, but perhaps maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the issues that you think are important to you as we get into the election.
Okay. So there's the issues which I call the corporate issues, which are like the bringing responsible governance to the Law Society, and every member of the coalition is signing, at least the Good Governance Coalition is signing on to theirs. But there's the issues that I guess when I look at where we are in 2023 and where we're potentially going to be 4 years from now, the next time we have an election, like what are the things that the Law Society needs to be focused on? So some of them, what I say, are table stakes, right? Like we need to be focused on competency, right? That's what the Law Society basically is in the business of doing, making sure that lawyers are competent and taking the appropriate actions when lawyers are not competent or acting inappropriately. Like that is table stakes for a regulatory body, and we need to always remember that is the core mandate, and we're doing so in the public interest. So that's a focus, and I've highlighted through my LinkedIn and other things certain areas that are going to make that a bit more challenging in the next 4 years. One is, and everyone's talking about chat GPT, but this rise of AI and what this means as far as competency, as far as passing law school exams. It really hit home the other day when I saw that the Chat GPT was able to pass. It wasn't a Canadian bar school exam, but it was an American law school exam or a bar exam. I think they also passed the medical school exam or the business school exam. So it's going to get a lot of different potential professions, but also how lawyers are going to use that type of technology in their practice. Like at what point can we rely on AI to make decisions to what points lawyers have to do certain things? So the whole idea of competency and where competency goes is going to be a huge issue that the Law Society needs to look into. The second one, and I mentioned it earlier, that I feel very strongly about is mental health and wellness. I do so because the year I spent as president of the Canadian Bar Association, it was the number one issue that both lawyers and when I talked to some of the law partners that I met with as part of my CBA president talked about. It really is I don't think the pandemic caused it, but it clearly didn't make it any better. And recently, the Law Society partnered with the University of Montreal to do a groundbreaking study on the Federation of Law Societies with the University of Montreal, did this study to see kind of where we were as far as baselining the legal profession as far as mental health and wellness, and the conclusions are scary, right? It really is a massive issue. So, what does the Law Society of Ontario need to do about it? Well, now we have this baseline. We need to try to address the issues. And, this is not an issue that can be dealt with. I mean, some of our bigger firms have some capacity to do this, but, quite honestly, no one has a monopoly on being able to assess this. And there's more people than just the people who operate in the bigger firms. So the Law Society really needs to be there to support the profession. And that kind of has two kind of main issues that I think are important. One of which is it's for the betterment of the profession, right? We need to make sure that lawyers are not burning out, and that's important. But the second thing is, it also leads to the competency issue that I mentioned earlier. Like, lawyers are having mental health issues, can't service their clients either. They're sadly making mistakes. Those become insurance issues. And quite honestly, it leads to an access to justice issue. If they're not lawyers because they're not able to practice because of mental health and wellness issues, obviously there's less lawyers to serve the community. So the whole idea of mental health and wellness is again something I feel very strongly about. I've really learned from those who I consider leaders in the space. Both Orlando De Silva, who was one of the first people I ever knew who really kind of came out as far as his challenges with mental health. His story has really resonated with me, and as well as Michelle Holland, now Madame Justice Michelle Holland, who was a former CBA president, who spoke about her struggles. I interviewed her actually for one of my CBA podcasts. Just resonates. It's like, if it can affect people like these two individuals are very high performing, leaders of our profession, it can affect anybody. So again, back to the importance of mental health and wellness. The third one that constantly concerns me is the young lawyers coming into the profession and what licensing looks like. There's been lots of discussions about articling, about paying for articling. There've been lots of discussions about changes. All I know is when I was CBA president, I got phone call after phone call after phone call of individuals saying, I'm in law school, I can't get an articling job. Or I'm in law school, I don't really know what I'm going to do because there's not the avenues open to me. And, these are good students. I think to be good students, they're obviously very well-spoken. But like, there's a challenge because we're putting people through law school, but what is the pathway into the profession? So I think the Law Society, as the gatekeeper as far as letting people into the profession, needs to be mindful of like, what does that licensing reform look like? And they've played around with these ideas before. This is not new, but I don't think that there's really been a comprehensive look at what that means. And again, I tie everything back in my mind to access to justice, which is we need lawyers to be able to serve the public because at the end of the day, that's the way that people are going to get access to justice. They need this professional advice. So we need to make sure that there's pathways for young lawyers who obviously want to start their careers to be able to get entry into the profession if they're competent to do so.
Now let's kind of unpack those 3 points.
Sorry, there was a lot there. I apologize. There was a lot there.
So let's look at, let's say, the first point there with respect to looking at AI, right? And in terms of the Law Society's role, and I know there's like the innovative sandboxes and things like that, but what are sort of the considerations there in terms of, on one hand, obviously we have things like the duty of confidentiality, right? And whatever is generated, like who owns, is this kind of getting into issues there, or with respect to even the external output, right? Once it's created, right? I mean, there's issues in how that can be used. I mean, what are some of the, without, given the limited time we have, but what are some of the things there that the Law Study would need to look at, and looking at it from the lens there as a bencher in the public interest, right? Because on one hand, right, I mean, it's kind of catchy. You have I was reading Donahue versus Stevenson and like explain it in sort of a creative ways, or like Dr. Seuss if he was explaining the law, right? I mean, there's always these fun things. I think as an educator that'll certainly be great, but from the public mandate of the Law Society benchers, right? what are the things that the public has to be concerned about as we move? And it's not like we can turn back at this point, right? I mean, it passes bar exams, it passes medical exams. What do we need to be cognizant about as we move on in our
Well,
future?
I'll be frank with you. I worry about people using ChatGPT or whatever the next version of ChatGPT to be their own lawyer, right? Like we've had all these discussions about, how people create their own wills or whatever the case may be. There's lots of legal issues that people need really professional advice of a seasoned of a licensed lawyer or paralegal to be able to provide. But if ChatGPT can be your lawyer, right? There's a that I guess that facilitates greater access to justice, but of course it really doesn't, because ChatGPT, despite the fact that it can actually pass a bar exam, has not been licensed, clearly doesn't have any ethical principles behind whatever advice it provides, and quite honestly, just based on the technology as I understand it, is not exactly always giving the right answers. It's giving answers based on certain things, but it's not really given a well-reasoned answer. So it's kind of like, where does technology, and this is I guess to a certain degree broader even than the Law Society, but the Law Society needs to consider this. Where does technology provide greater access to justice, and where do lawyers and paralegals engage in the process? And to the extent that lawyers and paralegals use those tools, what is appropriate for them using the tools? Is this supposed to supplant their legal judgment that they were trained for and licensed for? Can they just say, oh, well, I relied on ChatGPT to give this advice? Or is there something more that they need to do? Like, what is it the practice of law looks like when you're taking certain AIs to help give your answers? I mean, I think about there have been some existing tools out there. I know for my fellow colleagues who practice employment law that there is, I think I don't want to give any one service thing, but there are certain services now which have done a perusal of various case law and can quickly kind of tell you, like, this is the amount of notice that would be appropriate, and they can but you still need a seasoned lawyer to be able to sift through that and then provided advice to their clients. So it's kind of like, what is the intersection between what is legal advice, what AI can provide, and then for the public, kind of to the extent that they have to understand that AI, at least in its current iteration, is not a proxy for getting professional legal advice.
Great. And then you were talking a lot about mental health there in terms of the importance in our profession to also be aware, and certainly citing some heavyweights there in terms of them opening up. And there's been certainly talk, I mean, both on mental health issues and other initiatives of the Law Society of kind of what's the role of the Law Society in terms of the profession, in terms of, again, we're looking at costs, we're looking at fees, we're looking at everything like that in terms of what should the Law Society be doing and what should be done, whether it's coming from lawyers and paralegals themselves, whether it's coming from the CBA, right? In terms of here's the resources that are out there. And certainly there's a wealth of resources from all of these different avenues, but kind of how does that conversation fit from the Law Society's perspective of what they should be doing, perhaps what they don't need to be doing, and what more they could be doing?
Right. So I'd start with my view, which is nobody owns mental health and wellness. Everybody is a partner in trying to help support the profession. So if there's more cooks in the kitchen, in this case, it's great because people are going to engage in different ways. When some people during my CBA presidency, because I made this one of my priorities during my presidency, reached out and talked about their own journey. Not the people I mentioned; those were public. People who shared with me privately, and their journey to get help were all different. Right? Some people said, I found a mentor within the firm who I trusted. Some said that the firm had resources. Some said they went to a CBA webinar. For example, the CBA has all these mental health and wellness programs and online learnings. And then some people, the Law Society has run various seminars. So, to the extent that there's these different people providing services, as long as people can find an access point to get those services, I'm happy, right? Like that makes me happy because people are getting the support that they need. And to a certain degree, where the CBA, or in this case, the Law Society, fits in better than, for example, the firm is, a lot of people have said to me, I'm not comfortable talking to my managing partner. I'm not comfortable talking to these people because obviously I'm employed there and I don't want to, sadly there is there's stigmas, certain stigmas I wish they got eradicated about mental health and wellness, and they don't want this to be part of the equation. But if the Law Society, as they have done, can provide anonymous resources or toolkits or supports, then that is exactly where the Law Society should play, right? And I know some of this has already been done, right? The Law Society does put on continuing legal education. There are, lawyer assistance plans and those kind of things that help lawyers. But at the end of the day, now that we have a baseline, we should be taking tangible steps to increase awareness of these things and availability of these things, and then reassess if we've moved the yardsticks. Right? We now know where we are. 2020. Well, the survey was like 2022, but it was released just, I think, earlier this year or late last year. So the fact remains that, like, we're gonna have to see if we move the yardsticks and see what works, and then adapt. So the Law Society has a key role because, as I mentioned, so both the well-being of the profession, but it also speaks to the competency issue, which is clearly in the Law Society's wheelhouse. So yeah, I think it's important that they play a key role, along with, the Federation of Law Societies, which is obviously the national organization, because as much as I said nobody owns this issue, I'll also say that this issue is not unique to Ontario, right? Other provinces are struggling with this in their law societies as well, or their legal communities as well.
And then the last piece you brought up there was with the sort of new licensees, and certainly there you have articling students, you have law students, you have paralegal students, you have NCA students, you have internationally trained lawyers, and the whole process. And I've talked about articling with a number of candidates. I've talked about even the licensing exam itself, the fees that go into all that, and then even the fees coming out, right, in terms of as you look to repay all your student debts and go through the profession, you have all these other costs that you also, and as well as your mortgages or rent or whatever, right? But right. What again in terms of that conversation with the Law Society and finding a way to navigate all this, and certainly it's a discussion that you're going to have a number of different views, regardless of who the 53 people that will compromise our convocation on May the 25th. Right. But what are some ways, the Law Society can be doing maybe things differently or things the same to provide better supports for all of these individuals that I just mentioned?
Yeah, so I'll just start off by saying, maybe I show my age by saying, when I talk to young lawyers and they tell me what law school costs today, and I do know what law school costs today, and is I'm shocked. Like it's a huge upfront investment to go through licensure. Sorry, to go through law school in the hope that you're going to become a licensing lawyer. And, when I did it many, many years ago, I thought it was expensive. And I look at the cost today. So when you're looking at this and you're saying people are not going to law school because they don't have anything better to do for 3 years of their life. They're going to law school because they want to become lawyers, right? So the law schools have an important responsibility as part of that process to get those individuals trained and ready to be practicing law. And then the Law Society has an important role to make sure that these people have the sufficient competency to be licensed as lawyers. And they've done so various ways. They've done through examinations, and they've done through articling. And over the years, I've seen various iterations of what the examinations look like. When I got called to the bar, I think I had to write 6 or 8 different exams. And now we obviously have the barrister and the solicitor exams, which are different. Articling's also changed. I had to article for a year. Now articling is a shorter period of time. So I think, over time, things have changed based on the best practices as far as testing people, and also the best practices as far as the legal community. What I know is that there still remains, and actually it's probably gotten worse, the amount of individuals who've gone through law school, either in Ontario or, as you mentioned, the NCA, have come from other jurisdictions and want to either immigrate to Ontario, or they're returning to Ontario because they did. And how do you integrate them? I mean, if you start with the basis that the Law Society is out there to ensure competency, then there's different ways to ensure the competency, and you just don't want to be putting artificial barriers in place that stops people being licensed who would otherwise be competent. So you need to look at the system. You need to look at, does the licensing regime work? Is it right? And then the costs associated with it. People have talked to me about those costs, and obviously not just law school costs, but the other costs associated with that. There's the opportunity costs as well. And then as far as articling go, some people have ended up with fantastical articling experiences, and that obviously has set them up for their careers. And then obviously some people have taken other paths. So you just want to make sure, obviously with the underpinning of making sure that lawyers are competent, that you are not putting in place artificial barriers or unnecessary barriers to stop people being licensed. And at the end of the day, once they're licensed, making sure that they're prepared to provide the services, whether they decide to be in partnership with others, go in-house, because that's another change. Not everybody decides to go into private practice, or set up their own shop. So it's an area that needs to be explored. It has been explored in the past. I know there's other individuals who put their names forward as part of both my the coalition, the Good Governance Coalition, other people who feel strongly about this issue. So if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I think that there's definitely a sub-coalition of the willing who want the Law Society to have a closer look at these issues.
Now, speaking of all of these students, and certainly I have my own paralegal students that may be listening, as well as law students and NCA students, and anyone that's not yet licensed, but thinking about jumping into the profession. And as you mentioned, going through all of these barriers or things that are in place. Any words of wisdom, any advice that you can offer to them as they look to start their legal career?
Yeah, well, I would start by saying it's a great profession. I'd love you to join it because I'm proud. The amount of opportunities that are presented to me as a licensed lawyer. Again, I've spent most of my time in government or agencies or in-house, but like those have been fantastic and the experiences have been fantastic. So it's a great career. It's not without its challenges. I've talked about the mental health and wellness and some of the entry challenges, but it's a great career to be part of. But as far as the other piece of advice, I would say, and I've said this to others because others have considered, for example, do they article, do they do the law practice programs or whatever. Again, I'm more focused on the legal community because those are the people who tend to reach out to me more. I say the key is to get licensed, and then the world opens up to you because there's lots of different things that you can do. And the other thing, which again, this is not directly advice to just lawyers, it could be paralegals, is find a mentor, find somebody who's willing to kind of help guide you through the process of being a young lawyer, because that really will make a difference as you navigate your career path.
Perfect. Final question here for any of the lawyers that may be listening and they're deciding who to vote for, and certainly an important election. And hopefully, again, we get greater voter turnout this time as well, for that matter. But as they're looking to make their decision and use one of their 40 votes, why should they use that one on you?
So, because I bring along with my coalition candidates, I bring a long background of service to the legal community. In my case, through the Canadian Corporate Counsel Association, through the Canadian Bar Association, and also my experience as somebody who spent time, as I mentioned, in the government and the not-for-profit sector, mostly brings a different perspective to convocation. That as they're weighing decisions, it's important to have different perspectives, and I would bring one, given my background.
Thanks once again, Steve, for taking the time and joining us here today. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Take care.
Appreciate it. Bye now.